Mexico is many Mexicos, not only because of the dramatic social differences known to the world, but because of the ethnic background, the cultural traditions, the religious beliefs, and the ecological contexts that vary from one region to the other. Mexico has 29 ethnic groups belonging to 5 different linguistic families, from the north to the south of the country. The first settlers came from the Strait of Bering about 70,000 years ago, crossing Alaska, Canada, and the United States. The man from Tepexpan called that way by the place where it was found. Dates from 12,000 before Christ. Many settled in Mexico because they found an excellent climate, hunting game, and countless fruits. About 5,000 years ago, the first inhabitants of Mexico domesticated corn and beans. They also became hunter-gatherers and fishermen. Other settlers went to Central and South America, arriving there about 13,000 years ago. Suppose you think of Mexico today, with 32 states. We all speak Spanish, have one federal government, the same religion. Well, we can assume that pre-Hispanic Mexico had as many cities, with the difference that each city or town was a different kingdom, with their king, with other languages, various deities, and different customs. Each domain built its pyramids. There was good communication from city to city. But all of these small kingdoms, only a few became great cultures. The first civilization was the Olmecs, from the pre-classic period that flourished from 2500 BC to 200 after Christ. Their most important cities were La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and San Lorenzo in Veracruz and Tabasco. The vestiges of this culture are the giant heads they left behind. Their origins remain unknown. Even though it is the mother culture of Mesoamerica, they contributed to the network of commercial exchange. The second culture, belonging to the classic period, was the Teotihuacans. Their city was Teotihuacan, called the City of Gods. This massive complex is located approximately 50 kilometers from Mexico City, with 100,000 inhabitants. Their culture reached its peak 200 after Christ to 700 after Christ. It is considered the greatest civilization of Mesoamerica. The citadel has several complexes: the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Avenue of the Dead, and the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, which in Nahuatl means the snake. This temple has 366 snake heads. Their decline occurred in the 7th century due to political instability, internal rebellions, and climatic changes. The population dispersed into different parts of Mexico. It is a World Heritage Site since 1987. During the classic period, there was a boom of urbanism. It was a full development of the pre-Hispanic civilizations, consolidating art, ceramics, writing, and the calendar. Belonging to this period are the Zapotecs in Monte Albán and Mitla, in Oaxaca, Tajín in Veracruz, Cacaxtla in Tlaxcala, and Xochicalco in Morelos. The third great culture was the Toltecs. They belong to the post-classic period. They dominated the northern plateau from 900 AC to 1150 AC. The word Toltec has the meaning of great culture and wisdom. The mystical capital of the Toltecs was Toyan, known nowadays as Tula in the state of Hidalgo. Toltec civilization landmarks are the Atlantis on top of a flat pyramid. Their god was also Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs contributed with skills in war, sculpture, and the tracing of commercial routes. The Toltec culture did not disappear. It merged into the Mexica culture. The Maya civilization flourished from 250 to 1000 AC. They inhabited a vast region spread over 5 southeast states: Campeche, Chiapas, Quintana Roo, Tabasco, Yucatan, and in Central America, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. During their reign, people spoke in as many as 44 different languages or dialects. The Mayas created a civilization that throughout the centuries went through various changes, such as economic, cultural, family structure, religious, and political structure. Contrary to what we might think, the Mayan culture has not disappeared, as their descendants still live in most of these territories. The Mayas built beautiful buildings and produced elaborate jewelry, sculptures, and handcrafts. They were astronomical observers and designed a calendar with great precision. They built cities like Silbilchaltún, Calakmul, Etzna, Chichen Itza in Yucatan, Bonampak, and Palenque in Chiapas. The Maya scientific contribution included the calendar and the vigesimal counting system. Through their studies of the movement of the sun and the moon, the Maya were able to predict solar and lunar eclipses. They observed the activities of other celestial bodies such as Venus and Mars, and named the constellations. As they had a writing system, they were able to record all their discoveries. Their primary god was Kukulkan, which is the same in correlation with Quetzalcoatl. Their decline most likely happened due to drought, and that other emergencies, towns conquered some of the areas. The fifth civilization we can speak of is that of the Aztecs. The name Aztec means people who come from Aztlan. This place was located in Texas, New Mexico, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. The Aztec culture was the last to arrive at the Central Plains, known as the Valley of Mexico. According to the legend, they should establish themselves where they found an eagle on top of a cactus, devouring a snake, and they found it on the island of Texcoco. The Aztecs belonged to the post-classic period. They flourished from 1325, year that marks the foundation of Tenochtitlan, named after their priest Tenoch, and their decline came with the conquest of Mesoamerica by the Spaniards. The Aztecs were a militarized state, and the city was organized in different neighborhoods. They were a bloodthirsty civilization, making sacrifices to their gods, and were fighting their neighboring towns for tribute, for domination, and the spread of their empire. Their cultural contribution was creating the Chinampa, blocks of land, one on top of the other, set on the lake's edges, creating tiny islands for cultivation. This gave them the possibility of having high agricultural yields. The Aztecs also practiced the art of medicine, performing brain and heart surgery. They developed astronomy to a more significant extent than the Mayas. They also wrote sacred codices. Just before the arrival of the Spanish, Tenochtitlan was a thriving and flourishing city. Their decline came when the Spanish conquered the city in 1521, helped by the people of Tlaxcala who betrayed the Aztecs. Through 3 different epidemic periods, hundreds of thousands of natives died. All this crushed the Aztec Empire. The Spanish invasion began in 1519, following 2 years of dramatic events. Tenochtitlan fell in 1521 at the hand of Hernán Cortés, a Spanish general on behalf of King Charles I of Spain. The Mexican Emperor Moctezuma tried to avoid conflict with the invaders. He believed the conquerors were gods because they rode horses. To his skeptical mind, the men on horses appeared to be a single being. It was understandable because they had never seen a horse. Cortés first subdued the natives of Veracruz, and Moctezuma sent gold, gems, exotic foods, and this only lured the conquerors even more to conquer the Mexica Empire. He had heard that it was the most extensive and wealthiest empire of all the territory due to its tributes. The price became more appealing to Cortés. On the way, Cortés fought through tiny villages and finally arrived at Tlaxcala, whose people were exhausted by the Mexica's cruelty and the excessive taxes imposed to them. Seeing a potential ally, they decided to betray their fellow countrymen to the benefit of the foreign invader. Cortés, continuing his journey to the capital of Tenochtitlan, brutally slaughtered the Cholultecas to finally arrive at a city of wonder, built on an artificial island in the middle of a lake in what is currently Mexico City. Almost immediately, there was a smallpox epidemic with devastating consequences. The natives had no resistance to European diseases. This was when the actual conquest of Mexico began. While vastly outnumbered, the Spanish had the advantages of disease, horses, guns, and pistols. The Mexicas resisted a siege for a year, but ultimately Cuauhtémoc, the last Mexica emperor, was apprehended on the 13th of August 1521 and was tortured, burning his feet. His last famous words were said to his servant, who suffered the same fate. "Do you think I am on a bed of roses?" Between 1521 and 1525, Cortés and his generals led more expeditions and military campaigns in central and northern Mexico. The Spanish incorporated territories like California, Yucatan, Tulum, Nueva Galicia, now Guadalajara, northern Mexico, and Central America. The main interest of the conquest of Mesoamerica was the riches from all the gold and silver mine. The wealth was sent to Spain, and with the bounty they financed wars with France and England. Spain became known as the wealthiest country in the world. The captains were favored with riches and lands. Their quest was a success, but at an untold human cost. The colonial period is when Mexico became part of the Spanish colonies, and during their domination it acquired political unity under the name of New Spain. This period started after the fall of Tenochtitlan and continued for 3 centuries. When the colonial period started in Mesoamerica, expeditions came to expand their domains, one after the other. From 1522 to 1525, there was an intensive political activity to organize the government. They established lordships among the conquerors who could collect taxes and issue laws. They named encomenderos, a crown representative. They were obliged to keep military alertness so they would not lose their victories and alliances. They would govern on their own, not having a head to control them. They installed a central government as the sole representative of the Castilian crown. They created a document making Spain the legitimate successor of the Empire of Moctezuma. This document appeased the natives who believed that Moctezuma had actually bequeathed the empire. The conquerors decided to rebuild the destroyed and defeated city of Mexico and erected it as a capital of the conquered country. Building on top of the different pyramids, buildings for government, such as tax administration, justice administration, the government palace, the most crucial matters for the crown and church. The organization was causing a complicated and conflictive relationship among the Spanish, competing fiercely for the government's best positions. The church's arrival, which sent friars to evangelize the natives, helped to stabilize the country. Still, at the same time, they also brought another conflictive element, such as the Inquisition. The viceroy was the representative of the king himself. Only the nobles could be appointed. Consolidating the lordships implied very difficult changes. The difference of idiosyncrasy between natives and the Spanish, who decided to erase all trace of their customs, mainly due to lack of capacity and interest in understanding them. Evangelization was very strong. The friars built convents with churches in each town, gave names of saints to each city, and started evangelizing children. At the same time, they taught the natives positive cultural aspects, such as teaching them many trades. For the construction of the churches and convents, they taught them history, language, and music. Miscegenation was not accepted, especially by the friars. Soon, there was a narrow relationship between stocks. The Spanish brought black slaves, and this also caused another mixture of races. There were criollos, mestizos, castizos, mulattos, and 12 more mixtures combining Moorish, Chinese, etc. There were essential transformations: political, social, economical, and cultural. The discovery of many more silver and gold mines increased the power of Spain. Many influential thinkers and writers lived during this period. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, renowned as the Ten Muse, an iconic figure. The church acquired a lot of power due to the Inquisition, what was a dreaded institution. Many flourishing years for New Spain were awakening the minds of the population. By the end of the 18th century, the dynastic change from the Habsburgs to the Bourbons was putting an end to the imperial hegemony. The consolidation of a national identity was fundamental to the Creoles and the Mestizos. Influential Mexican thinkers started planting the idea of the Aztec nation, the land of Anahuac, and the legitimate Mexican empire. There was only one more step to determine our nationality as Mexicans, and not of New Spain. "300 years of the colonial period, during which Spain had to solve many problems to have a grip on its power, but there was a period of transition in which liberalism and nationalism started to prevail on the international stage, and new states and nations began to forge. The French and American revolutions were extended to the Latin American countries and introduced new principles to political life. In 1810, the new Hispanic Society, formed by a human mosaic created by Spanish-born and Creoles, started conspiring in the New World. A conspiracy was discovered in the house of the king's chief magistrate, Don Miguel and Doña Josefa Ortiz de Domínguez. They would organize literary, social gatherings where captains of the Spanish army, such as Ignacio Allende, Juan Aldama, and a priest, Miguel Hidalgo. The conspirators were planning to initiate an insurrection in December. They started it in September as they were discovered. In Atotonilquillo, Hidalgo gave the insurgents the first banner of the Virgin of Guadalupe. All the years of inequalities and injustices helped extend the insurrection around Mexico. José María Morelos, a priest of Carácuaro, presented himself to Miguel Hidalgo, and he received orders to take Acapulco. Hidalgo abolished slavery in Guadalajara. The insurgents accomplished several victories, however. 5,000 royalist disciplined soldiers arrived from Spain and defeated 9,000 insurgents. In Saltillo, Hidalgo, Allende, Aldama, and Mariano Jiménez were apprehended, taken to Chihuahua, tried and condemned. They were decapitated, and the heads were sent to Guanajuato, where they hung them each in one of the corners of the Alhóndiga de Granaditas. Morelos, a great leader, continued with the struggle. He conquered a significant extension of territory, summoned the Congress, declared the country's sovereignty, and started organizing the government. He wrote an important document called The Feelings of the Nation. Congress conferred him executive power, and he adopted the titles of Servant of the Nation. Spain, trying to regain control, sent a new viceroy and offered amnesty to all the insurgents. The crown's prestige was totally worn out. They were unable to restore order, and in 1820 there was a possibility to consummate independence. The king was forced to swear the Constitution of 1812 and call for elections, summoning the courts. 10 years of struggle had devastated the country. By 1821, there were two factions, the independent movement and the monarchists, who wanted to have an emperor and continue belonging to the crown of Spain. Agustín de Iturbide became the first emperor, but his empire lasted only 9 months. In 1824, a Congress was installed. The country was named Estados Unidos Mexicanos, with 19 states and 4 territories, and 1 federal district. The power was divided into 3 powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. By 1829, the copper coin was introduced, and Mexico started receiving recognition from different countries, all interested in the Mexican market. Mexico had challenging times after the independence. For many years, they tried different forms of government, but the foreign interests, the personal interests of the people in the government, constantly trying to be in power for their wealth, made it very difficult to consolidate the democratic republic. By 1830, Mexico was in crisis. It was a period of anarchy. There were more than 30 presidents and 3 constitutions. The United States tried to buy Texas because many American settlers had established themselves in Texas. President Santa Anna, trying to cover himself with glory, besieged a mission called El Álamo for 13 days, after which he entered the mission and left no one alive. William Travis, James Bowie, and David Crockett died defending it. Remember, El Álamo became the battle cry as an example of resistance against oppression, liberty, justice, and loyalty. Mexico does not consider this battle a won battle, but a shameful victory. In 1945, Texas joined the United States. The differences with Mexico allowed the American government to provoke a war and invade Mexico. President James Polk wanted to annex California. The American army battled their way to Mexico City. By 1945, the American flag was waving at the National Palace. The American cry was to absorb all Mexico. Peace was negotiated. The United States demanded more territory. Mexico recognized the loss of half of its territory. California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas. Benito Juárez was elected president in 1847. He tried to recognize the administration and education. Still, Mexico had no resources but terribly indebted. Stopped payments of debts with usurious interest from Britain, Spain, and France. They blocked the Mexican ports to force payments. Juárez sent a minister to negotiate. England and Spain accepted, but the French did not. They disembarked and invaded Mexico. Napoleon III proclaimed the empire and sent Maximilian, brother of the Austrian Empire, to become the Emperor of Mexico. Juárez fled to the United States and stayed there until the American Civil War ended. Lincoln supported Benito Juárez and protested against the French invasion. Neither Napoleon nor Francis Joseph helped Maximilian. In 1867, the Mexican Liberal Army battled against the French and apprehended Maximilian, who was tried by a martial court and condemned to the maximum penalty. Juárez wanted the world to know that Mexico would never again accept a foreign invasion and an empire. And he said, "Let this be an example to the world." Juárez worked tirelessly for 6 years. He died, and by 1877, Porfirio Díaz, a general of the army who had fought with Santa Anna, was sitting on the presidential chair. This marked the period called the Porfiriato that lasted for 34 years. Porfirio Díaz starting respecting the anti-re-election banner, promoted constitutional reforms against immediate re-election, but it was a way of attracting more followers. We can refer to two Porfiriatos, from 1877 till 1888, when he eliminated the restriction of re-election. In this first period, he reconstructed, pacified, unified, conciliated, and negotiated with other countries. He was loyal to the groups that supported him and lured his opponents. He gave recognition to the army that fought with him. He re-established diplomatic relationships with France, England, Germany, and Belgium. He also gained favor with the United States. However, there were many difficulties to overcome, such as a foreign debt. He was firm in defending national sovereignty. Porfirio Díaz's regime would oscillate between legality and the appearance of legitimacy. His second period was characterized by total centralism and a more personalist and authoritarian attitude. The change was due because many of his original supporters died, and three new figures performed an important role that created a conflict that eventually caused the fracture of the Porfirian elite. The rupture was inevitable when he had to re-elect his successor. Repression became stronger. Many crises propitiated the downfall of the Porfirio Díaz regime. After he proclaimed winner for the 8th time, the revolution broke out. The Mexican Revolution is a sequel of the Porfirian period and the events that defined Mexico of the 20th century. Porfirio was in his 8th term as president, celebrating the 100th anniversary of Mexican independence and his 80th birthday. Díaz was lauded by the foreign press and hailed for the outstanding accomplishments of his regime. There were different factions, all with various claims, and they were all trying to control power. A new figure in the history of Mexico appeared, Francisco Madero. He wished to end the re-election system and wanted greater social justice for all Mexicans. Emiliano Zapata from the state of Morelos rose to Madero's cause. In the north, Doroteo Arango, better known as Francisco Villa, had a decisive victory against the regime's forces. 7 months later, Porfirio Díaz left Mexico from the port of Veracruz to Paris, where he died 4 years later. His departure set celebrations all over Mexico. This was the first act. Much more blood would be shed before the end of the great drama. Madero was elected president in 1911, but was overthrown by Victoriano Huerta in a coup d'etat. And 2 days later, he had him executed with his vice president, declaring himself president. This double murder caused 10 days of heavy fighting in Mexico City, an episode called the Tragic 10 Days. After this episode, more revolutionists appeared: Venustiano Carranza, Álvaro Obregón, Francisco Villa, and Emiliano Zapata. Their first decision was to defeat Pascual Orozco, who had gained power in the north. He was considered the common enemy. The Villistas in the north, the Zapatistas in the southwest, Álvaro Obregón in Sinaloa and Guadalajara. Venustiano Carranza had gained more territory, and by 1915, he had defeated the Zapatistas and the Villistas, and he was elected president. In the meantime, Villa and Zapata were killed in ambushes. Carranza worked to appease the country, but was also killed in an ambush. The revolution had been a social, political, warlike process that lasted 10 years. In 1920, the new state was born with a national identity. Álvaro Obregón was the next president. He created many new institutions, such as the Bank of Mexico, Banamex. The most extraordinary development were in the cultural field. Vasconcelos, the first secretary of the Public Education Ministry, promoted all kinds of artistic expressions, published books, opened libraries. José Clemente Orozco, Diego Rivera, and David Alfaro Siqueiros painted murals in all the public buildings, murals we still admire. Mexico was finally living a period of peace, which helped very much to improve the economy and everyday living. Obregón's term was coming to an end. The next election was on its way. There have been 19 presidents from 1924 to present times. I will only mention some outstanding events during those 97 years. Obregón's successor was Plutarco Elías Calles. His main objective was to give order to the post-revolutionary transformation process. He founded the PRI party, Partido Revolucionario Institucional, in 1929, which ruled for 70 years. However, the most dramatic event during his period in power was a confrontation he had with the Catholic Church, which caused a war from 1926 to 1929, called La Guerra de los Cristeros. The Christ Followers' War was between the government and the lay militias due to Calles' religious law of intolerance, not accepting cult liberty because he wanted a lay state. The war was mainly focused in the states of Michoacán, Jalisco, Guanajuato, Querétaro, Zacatecas, Nayarit, Sinaloa, Durango, and Guerrero. When Calles changed the constitution and prohibited mass celebrations, he started persecution and repression against Catholics. He would massacre priests during their mass celebrations. The Cristeros organized an army in defense of religious freedom. They would not topple the government, but they were not going to be easily defeated. The Cristeros started an economic boycott, which caused endemic instability. After 4 years of war and 250,000 dead, there was a new election. The next president, Portes Gil, agreed with them to open churches, giving liberty of cult again. A new historical period began, not exempt from problems and changes, but with a new spirit of social harmony and political stability. In 1938, President Lázaro Cárdenas issued the law of expropriation of our oil, which had been in the hands of 17 foreign companies, mainly American, who had control of the industry. Thus, Mexico became the sole owner of this essential natural resource. At the same time, improving labor conditions for the Mexican workers who had worked under inhuman conditions with the foreign companies. Mexico had changed from an agricultural community to an urban society, giving economic wealth and population growth periods. In the political scene, the ruling party during 70 years, the PRI, had good and bad presidents. The PRI wanted to keep control of the country. Plutarco Elías Calles continued to have significant influence over the following 4 presidents, to the point that they would say the government was a diarchy. Lázaro Cárdenas did not allow that, and he forced Calles to abandon the country. In the cultural scene, radicalism was at the order of the day. Intellectuals and artists created new organizations, published books with nationalistic content. Many communist mobilizations happened. Another assertive decision taken by Cárdenas was to receive thousands of refugees and orphans during the Spanish Civil War. During World War II, Mexico joined the Allied forces, which boosted the economy. The United States improved its relationships with Mexico because of the importations it needed. The 2 countries were able to smooth things and signed several agreements. After the war, the government created new institutions: Social Security for Health, Federal Electricity, Pemex Oil Company, worker unions, pension programs, chambers for different industries, and the Bankers Association. The most significant priority for Mexico was industrialization. From 1962 to 1964, Mexico did not accept participating in the United States Cold War against Cuba and received international recognition. However, in 1968, just before the 19th Olympic Games in Mexico, there was a student movement protesting against the poverty conditions and many other social problems in many places of the country. President Díaz Ordaz thought it was a communist conspiracy. He ordered to take over the Autonomous University of Mexico. Some high government officials ordered snipers to attack students summoned in the Plaza Tlatelolco for a peaceful demonstration. The army thought that the students were attacking them and the military slaughtered them all. This episode made it clear to the world that the regime could not negotiate and that the government had total control over the media. The Olympic Games did take place despite these events. From 1972 to 1982, the Mexican peso devalued several times. The peso lost 760 times its value, causing a crisis in many sectors. We were paying millions of pesos for first need products. From 1980 to 1990, the demand for pot, cocaine, and other substances in the United States caused the flourishment of the drug trafficking business, which continues today here and in all the world. Mexico signed the Free Trade Agreement with the United States and Canada in 1993. Many surprise events happened in 1994. The rebellion of the FNLZ, Frente de Liberación Zapatista in Chiapas, a group against the government, fighting for equality due to the terrible poverty and inequality of the country. Another event was the assassination of the candidate to the presidency, Luis Donaldo Colosio, who was a person with high moral values and the hope of a change of direction of the government for a better Mexico. The fractures of the government were taking Mexico to the abysm. From the year 2000 to the present time, Mexico is still struggling to solve the inequalities and poverty of the country. As you can see, Mexico has only struggled throughout the centuries to transform itself in a nation where the dignity of all human beings be respected. Mexico is a country of unmeasurable wealth, historical, cultural, human, and natural resources. What do we need to improve a world power? Have a productive national system. Have high-quality education. A robust financial system. To focus on the development of technological innovations. Zero tolerance to all forms of corruption, and government leaders with high moral values to avoid corruption. The world is changing in so many ways, and Mexico is changing as well. Mexicans are now more demanding. We want better government, better politicians, better quality of life. We have to prepare our youth for a demanding new world. All in all, we are happy people who want to continue having a peaceful country. We want to be recognized, accepted, and respected. Mexicans open their arms to the world, to everybody who desires to live here and enjoy its many riches. Thank you for attending this conference.